Hello and welcome to a weekly Parshas Shir with a commentary of the Alshich. And this week's Shir is for the Refuah Shalema of Chaim Eliezer ben Altabela. That's my wife's uncle, who's an old fellow and is in hospital in Los Angeles and needs a Refuah Shalema. An old fellow, nevertheless, a very young person at heart with a tremendous sense of humor, quite a character. And we wish Uncle Howard, as he's known in the family, a very speedy recovery. And this week's Parsha is the Parsha of Achare. And Achare is one of the most difficult Parshas in the Torah, or rather, the part which refers, the incident that it refers to, which is the death of his two sons, is one of the most difficult parts of the Torah. I think it would be worthwhile just reminding ourselves, because as far as the Alshich is concerned, or our Alshich is concerned, we're only going to concentrate on the first two psukim. I did allude to this last year, however, I want to take this in a different direction this year. So let's just remind ourselves of the psukim. Then I will show you one or two, seven actually, parshas of the questions of the Alshich on the first two psukim, and then we can see what we can come up with. Before I do that, let me just point out that we've got a rule which we keep referring to in our share, which is that the parshas, the juxtaposition of the parshas of the Torah with the time of the year in which they are read, in which they occur, is hardly accidental. And here we are reading Parshas Achare after Pesach, after Yud Tzim, when we started on our journey. In fact, I'm recording this on Erev Shabbos, the 12th night, 13th night of the Omer. I didn't really count that, so I'll let this live. And I should say incidentally, I hope you had a wonderful Pesach. I had a great Pesach. I was at a hotel with 1,400 people, and I had to speak and be jolly and passionate and enthusiastic. And on the first night, I got a toothache, aging toothache, which lasted for 2 days until I could get to a dentist. So that was fun. I hope your Pesach was much better than mine. But of course, as soon as we leave Pesach, or on the second night of Pesach, we start our journey to Mount Sinai. We're on the journey from Mitzrayim. And again, it's not incidental that we read the story of the Parsha of Achare when the Jewish people are taking their first steps, the first part of the journey from Mitzrayim to Mount Sinai, and we'll see why that's important in a second. Let's remind ourselves of the psukim. I have my little art scroll. I don't know where I bought this actually. Did somebody give it to me? Yeah, I think I bought it. Okay, and it says the following thing: V'yadaber Hashem el Moshe, and Hashem says to Moshe. I'm just reading this for context. We're going to go back and look, of course, more deeply in the Alshich shortly. V'yadaber Hashem el Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, Achare after the death, Shnei Aaron, the two sons of Aaron, two sons of Aaron, Bikar Bosam. When they drew it, well, how does this translate? So, when they approached before Hashem, the Alshich really dislikes that translation. Anyway, so we'll keep it for the moment. And he died. And then it says, and Hashem says to Moshe, speak to Aaron, your brother, it should come any time. In fact, it's only allowed to come into Yom Kippur, to the Holy of Holies, Elikodesh, to the holy place, the Beis Parkas, through the curtain, in front of the ark. So he doesn't die, keep it on and around, of course, because Hashem's presence appears on top of the Kapparas, the lid of the ark in which the two Ten Commandments, the broken tablets, and the other ones are contained. Fine. That's what we're looking at tonight. Now, before I tell what the Alshich has to say about that, I'm afraid I'm going to take you, I'm quite proud to take you in a different direction. And I'll put that over here in my desk next to my keyboard for a second. And we're going to travel in the direction of the Sfas Emes. Now, Sfas Emes, of course, one of the great rabbis of Ger. Ger Sinas. Before I do so, I left this a bit prematurely. Why does the Pasuk tell us about the death of Aaron's two sons? When Hashem speaks to Aaron and commands him what to do about coming into the Holy of Holies, Yom Kippur, and reminds him of the death of his two sons, Rashi says the following. It emphasizes the death of his two sons. It doesn't just say, don't come in whenever you think it's appropriate to the Holy of Holies. To remind him In the same way, and he gives a moshel from a Rabbi Eliezer, and that's based in the Sifri, which is the Medrash, which says the following thing. There was a fellow who was not well. A doctor came in and said to him, "Now you're not well. In order to recover, you must avoid eating cold food and staying in damp and cold places." And then there was a second doctor, because of course in the Moshe it's a Jewish patient, and all Jewish patients want a second opinion. So another doctor comes in and says the exact same thing. Don't eat cold food and don't sleep in damp and cold places. So you don't die the way that George died. Russia didn't say George, but I just threw that one in there. So that George, you didn't die the way that other fellow died. That's adding a sting in the tail. It's bringing it home. So Rashi says that the reason it says here to Aaron, when he's telling him when and when you cannot come into the Holy of Holies, don't die the way your sons died. Don't do what they did so that you will die too. And of course, the death of the two sons of Aaron is one of the great mysteries, really. The rabbis struggle to come up with a convincing, an overwhelming, I should say, reason why that could possibly have taken place. But let's, as I say, let's go to the Sfas Emes. Now, the Sfas Emes is one of my favorite Hasidic stories. Like Rashi, he is very concise. So you have to read it over. In preparing this for tonight's share, I've read this 6 times, and each time I saw new insights. And what's really going to be quite short, but I'm going to read this to you. And then I'm going to go on to my favorite non-Hasidic story, one of my more favorite Litvish story, which is Das Chochmah Mussar of Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz, the famous Mashgiach of Mir. And what I'm going to tell you that he has to say will be extraordinarily surprising and maybe even a little bit challenging. And then we're going to go back and answer the questions of the Alshich. So that's what we're going to do this week. And I hope you'll enjoy our tour for the Alshich, the Sfas Emes. Don't forget Rashi, of course, we added to Rashi. And we're going to look at Rabbi Yerucham as well. Back to the Alshich. Okay, so here is the Sfas Emes. Very, to my mind, fabulously brilliant, always very brilliant. Takes a lot of work to fully squeeze all the beautiful drops of wisdom that come from this particular fruit. So he quotes Rashi, who quotes a Medrash. So Rashi is in Vayikra Yudches. In other words, our says, Medrash says, Kabalti Malchusai. The Medrash says, Kabalti Malchusai, accept upon yourself my Malchus, accept upon, and if I'm the king, then you're the servant. Accept upon yourself that you're my servant, Kiblu Gizarossi, and then accept my Gezeras, my rules. Now, I should read that to you. So it's talking about Yudches in this week's Parsha. So let me just leap forward to Yudches. And in Yudches, and Achare worship base, it says the following thing. It says, this, okay. Dabar Bnei Israel, Marta Alehem, and Yeshem Lekechem, Lord your God. Kamaisa Eretz Yisrael Asher Yishabtem Bo Loi Sasu, Kamaisa Eretz Canaan, Shaniki Maybe Eskem, Shoma Loi Sasu. So the Pasuk said the following thing. I read it very quickly. It said, Hashem speaks to Moshe and he says, speak to the Jewish people and say to them, I am the Lord your God. And then he says to them, now this is what you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to worship other gods, etc., etc. Notice what's being stated here. Stage 1 is, I'm the Lord your God. You have to be willing to accept me as Hashem, and then consequently, now that you are my servants, if that's the word, I suppose is, then here are my instructions to you. But first of all, there has to be a contract of master-servant in order for the mitzvahs I'm going to tell you or give you to do to be ones that you're willing to do. It has to be that relationship between me and about to sneeze. There you are. Authentic live recording with sneezing and nose blowing, which I suppose I should edit out. Anyway, so that's what he's referring to. Go back to the Sfas Emes and let's see what he says. So he says the first stage is accepting Hashem as the middle. The second stage is now that you've accepted, we've got the contract. You're my employee, as it were. This is the task I want you to carry out. But as the king, you're my servant. This is what I want you to do for me. And the king, the Gemara says the same thing. The Kabul all Shemayim Tchila. And the Gemara makes the exact same point. You have to accept me as your king, and then after that, I'll tell you what to do. Fine. Kachu b'kol mitzvahs. B'frat shetzorach liyach leyos. The kavonas asiyas k'dei l'kabul all Shemayim. And he says that's the purpose of all the mitzvahs. All the mitzvahs that Hashem gives us to do is in order to be a vehicle to demonstrate, to practice, to embed within ourselves the fact that we're doing it because we're avoiding with Hashem. In other words, what comes first is to be an Eved of Hashem. Once you've got that as you firmly established as the bedrock, then you can move on to the mitzvahs. It says the Sasem, deep, deep stuff. But mitzvahs, therefore, ultimately are in order to allow you to practice and to exercise that relationship. Good. Shazar talks about says that's the purpose of mitzvahs. So he does say that. And it says to me, Achare law, Tziva, don't do anything which I've not commanded, but Yikra Yud Aleph. So again, that's always important to go to the source. So Yud Aleph is not our Parsha. So let's see if I can take you back to Yud Aleph of the Yikra quickly. Of course, I should have done a marker there to speed this up. If anybody's ever into my share, you know there's all markers. So here it is. So you don't make sure that that's right. I think it's your base actually, but never mind, just showing up. The no, it says you're not left, but I'm still not sure it's base. Let's see. When the Yikro ben Aaron, the two sons of Aaron, Nodal Levi came, Ishmael, each one brought his fire pan. But you know, hen ish a fire because Sima Oleh starts to put spices on it. Krivo with Hashem and the kingdom of close to Hashem. Eshor was a fire which had not Zora, means strange, alien, had not been commanded by God, an offering not commanded by God. But say it's Lifnei Hashem, and they died Lifnei Hashem, and that's Lifnei Hashem, Hashem, Lord Siva. No, that's what's talking about. It's something that I did not command. The death, therefore, of the two, if we're saying that the purpose and function, the bedrock, the fundamental, the stage one, the essential first stage, is to build a relationship which you're an Eved Hashem, as we said, then everything else has to carry out is going to embed that within yourself. But if you do it, if you do something which is not commanded by Hashem, by definition, it's failing to secure or to reinforce that relationship. So it says, that's why it says there, Asher lo tziva. You did something I did not command, and therefore it's going to fail in the primary purpose of the mitzvah, which is to solidify and weld that relationship of you and me together. Okay. That means that's to say that the doing of the mitzvah in and of itself is subservient to the idea of building a relationship with God. It's only a vehicle to do so. Building a relationship with God, that is the ikar. Because the reason for mitzvahs, because we do mitzvahs because God told us to do them. It's a function of our relationship with God, building a relationship with God. But when you're doing mitzvahs, the purpose and function of doing mitzvahs is solely and uniquely only in order to build that relationship. You should want nothing for yourself. You should have no ulterior motives, no personal motives. You don't want to become rich as a consequence of this. You don't want to become famous as a consequence of this. You don't want the adulation of other people because of this. You're doing it simply to reinforce this relationship with God. That applies to every single mitzvah. So therefore, he says the following thing. Because you're all the Kabul al Shemayim, and when the person, before he does a mitzvah, makes that mitzvah, has intention, focuses on the fact this is going to help me solidify, it's going to build my relationship with God, and then you're doing the mitzvahs where they should be done. Now this is going to do stage two. It's very important, and he says, the Kain who Yasa the Chaybahem, and that's what the Apostle says. Also in our week's Parsha, Yudches and Posset A, the Chaybahem. Except that it says the Chaybahem. The Chaybahem, and you live by them, means there's lots of halachas that spring from those two words. One of them is that you're allowed to break Shabbos in order to save a life. If you're a doctor, you're allowed to save a life by breaking Shabbos. If you're a patient, you're allowed to pick up the phone if you've got pain in your chest or you're really feeling very bad. You're allowed to pick up the phone and phone somebody on Shabbos. Shabbos? No, b'chai b'hem. The mitzvahs that I give you in the Torah are to live by, to allow, to sustain life by, not to die by. So therefore, the mitzvahs of the Torah are suspended in order to save life. No, he says, that means to say that the mitzvahs gives life. They draw life to everybody. Everything comes from mitzvahs. And the mitzvahs, as we said, because it solidifies a relationship with God. When the person therefore takes everything back to the source, which is God, remember we start with, you're making God the Odain, the master, and you are the Eved. You're building a relationship with God. As a consequence, then you can move on to doing the mitzvahs, which will reinforce that. So when you do the mitzvah, it's connecting you with God, as we said before. Because nothing you can do that it doesn't contain a mitzvah. I remember I was once driving to get my haircut, and a friend of mine, Rabbi Roy, I used to teach from in a seminary in Manchester for many years, an old friend, and he's now living in Jerusalem. And he phoned me up and he said something very clever when I told him, sorry, I can't speak long, I'm just going into the barbershop. He said, remember to tell them not to cut your payas. Careful not to cut your payas. And then you'll be turning the mundane, normal thing of getting a haircut into a mitzvah. You're protected your payas. You can turn everything into a mitzvah. And doing a mitzvah brings life to everything. And therefore the opposite is true as well. Without that kavana, I'm doing this mitzvah, this commandment that God has given me in order to build a relationship with Him. If that thing that you're doing is not been commanded with Him, it fails to bring life. And in fact, in the case of the two sons of Aaron, death. Now, of course, we're talking about two people who were at the highest possible level, as we'll see when we get to the Alshich in a second. But that's an incredibly, I think, interesting concept here, which the Sas Emes brings. But that has to be the kavanah of the mitzvah. Right. By doing the mitzvah, I want to build a relationship with God. He is the master. I've signed up to be his servant, to be his servant, and do what he wants as a demonstration of our relationship. But that's the Sas Emes. Move in over here. And let's move on to someone from the non-Hasidic world who was as great in the non-Hasidic world as the Sas Emes was in the Hasidic world. And this is one of my very, very famous for. And Das Chochmah Musar here, Talif, and it's page Kuflav. And this is what he has to say. And this is called Tachlis Yisib Mitzrayim Einin Ha'avdus. And very interestingly, even though he goes from a non-Hasidic direction, he echoes, parallels, mirrors, and what the Sas Emes says, or vice versa. And ultimately, there is no real distinction. There is two aspects, two facets of the same dime, the same tower, the Hasidic approach and the non-Hasidic approach. So let's hear what Rabbi Yochanan has to say. And this is one you really have to be sitting down for. So hold on to your hats or your yarmulkes, and if you're a lady, perhaps your shaitel or tichel. This bar of a minor already explained the idea in the previous essay, so I'm going to miss the reference to that because just tell you what it says here. But his bar edsel odem ha'amuna nisim, and that is the same. You see it's Mitzrayim. Sure, mitzvah session, see it's Mitzrayim. The mitzvah of Yitzias Mitzrayim, of remembering Yitzias Mitzrayim, of the Exodus. Einish Yisama to Yisbara Edsel odem is not in order to prove and to establish in the heart of the person Hamuna Banisim Isis Amishim Zoklan Israel. It's not in order to prove to you that God did miracles to the Jewish people going out from Israel. Now, we just left the Seder table behind, so that sounds a very strange thing to say. Don't we remember the Makos dam, Sfardea, the finger in the cup and spilling the drops of wine, etc. Isn't it all about what God did in the midst in the miracles of Egypt? No, not at all. The tachlis, the purpose, the function, the ambition of all of this is avdus. It's for a person to realize that the relationship they have with God is an evid. Now, of course, definitely, it's a stage. It's a stage in order to make a person willing to do so. The reality of those miracles, the miracles of the 10 miracles of the Shrine of Plagues, the miracles we witnessed, we went through, those miracles allow us to become avoiding of Hashem. But let's read on a little bit more. This is the bit you got to hold on to the chair for. And anybody thinks that the purpose of Yitzias Shrine was Amunah, simply faith, and that is your purpose, your ambition from to get from the experience, the story, the message. Your ambition is to solidify Amunah Hashem is Barak, V'su loy, and no more. Listen to this. You failed totally and completely in building a relationship with God. Boom! When I read it the first time, wow. And I had, like the Sasema stuff, I had to go through this one 3 or 4 times to fully comprehend, or to hopefully fully comprehend the point that he's trying to make. That's to say, we would have thought, we do think that the Yitzias Mitzrayim, the miracles of the Yitzias Mitzrayim, completely and irreversibly imprinted in the DNA of Klal Yisrael. Amunah and Hashem is Baruch. And let's say it does, but takes you no further, and that's nothing. You've got no, even despite all that, you've got no relationship with God. It needs to go to the next stage. And the next stage is building a relationship of after. So I'll read a little bit more. Because the whole purpose of Yitzias Mitzrayim, the purpose of the journey we're in now, in this day 13, of going out from Mitzrayim, counting the Omer, etc., is in order to build us, to create within us a relationship which is avdus. Everything about the Jew, the measure, the metric by which a Jew's worth, a Jew's quality is going to be calculated, is going to be how much are you in Eved Hashem? Of course you believe in God. There are lots of people who believe in God and even believe that Yitzias Mitzrayim occurred, but that doesn't impact on their behavior, in their interpersonal behavior, in their business behavior, and anything else. It's only if you make yourself an Eved Hashem, and an Eved Hashem can only do what the Torah has to say that he's going to do, as the Sfas said, to build that relationship with God. So it's only to how much you have become an Eved through this process. The realization of the miracles, the amount you have in God, did it take you to the next purpose, which is seeing yourself as an Eved of Hashem? You're going to be estimated. Your report card upstairs is going to be calculated according to how much you were, could be defined, could be described, could be recalled as being an Eved Hashem. So that's of course, Amunah has a function of that, part of that. It's the bedrock if it's the stage 1. Through your faith in God and your Achare, the recognition your Achare is atop, and your gratitude for what he did to us in Mitzrayim. But that realization flows or should flow to a next stage, a natural next stage. He's God, he is Hashem is Baruch, he is Elohim. Therefore, I have to be his Elohim. Therefore, it is essential that brings you to that conclusion. I want to be an Eved Hashem. Right. 2 interesting sidetracks there. I move these two, the Sfas and the Rabbi Yochanan aside, and we come back to my Shifra Kodesh, our Shifra Kodesh. So here are the questions which he has to ask on the Parsha. I think to speed things up, maybe I'll just, I was going to tell you 7 of them. I might not tell you them all so we can get through this more easily. It said, again, listen to the Hebrew. The first question is so obvious, and maybe you can spot it, and maybe you did spot it, and I read it before. And Hashem speaks to Moshe after the death of Shnei Bnei Aaron, the 2 sons of Aaron, and the Kervosim, when they brought near a fire or a sacrifice, Lifnei Hashem, or they came close. What was their Art School translation? I dislike intensely. Quickly look, how did they translate this? It is when they approached before Hashem, um, and they died. So the Alshich says this: there's a problem here, and the problem obviously is that Hashem and Moshe. Achare must be Baron. Hashem said to Moses after the death of two sons of Aaron, when they approached, came near Hashem, and they died. When he said they died after the death of two sons of Aaron came near and died, said died twice. This wasn't two sons, but that's not really the answer. The obvious question here is, Aaron, it doesn't tell you what he said. Next passage says, Yom Hashem al Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, hold on, just said, the first passage said, V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe. But instead of saying what he said, it then gives you a point in time, a time reference, a historical reference. And when was this? This was after the death of two sons of Aaron, when they brought a sacrifice which and died. And what did he say? If you want to say it's what he said in the next passage, so why not go? Why not say that? Why do we need the time factor here? So we've got Yidaber, but the second passage says V'yom Hashem al Moshe, and Hashem says to Moshe. The Daber and Omar are obviously two different words. They both mean speak. One can speak. One Yidaber means to speak harshly, and the Omar means gently. So that's something else to notice. Another very important thing to notice: V'yom Hashem al Moshe, Daber al Aaron Achicha, speak to Aaron your brother. Oh, is Aaron Moshe's brother? I didn't know that. Of course you did. Remember, we're letting the Alshich. The Alshich's basis of his analysis is there's no word that's extra in the Torah. There's no mistakes. There's no oops. If it's the wrong tense, why is it the wrong tense? If it's the wrong gender, why is it the wrong gender? If it's the plural, it should be the singular. Why is it like that? There are no mistakes. And there are no extra words that are totally, irrelevant. Every word counts. So it's telling us in this week's Parsha, in Achare that Moshe and Aaron were brothers. I think I knew that. So it has to be telling us something else. Those are the points I think we can deal with from the Alshich. And let's see how that connects to the Sas Emes and the Rabbi Yerucham that we read before. So I'm now going to read a bit of Alshich to you. And take off my glasses, I think, for this one. And it says the following thing. Really, you're talking like you might think, now go back to the Rashi. Remember, the Rashi says that in giving Aaron the instructions about when he comes in on Yom Kippur to the Holy of Holies, what he can do, when he can come in, what he should do, when he should not come in. He's like the second doctor, the Pasuk is like the second doctor, warning him that he shouldn't die like his two sons died. So, says the Alshich, that might lead you to be suspicious about two possibilities. One, Hashem considered the two sons of Aaron to be bad people. That's why he keeps saying, that's a bit like the Rashi's mashal, right? So you shouldn't die the way that George died, right? This stupid man who was ill, and I warned him not to eat cold food or sleep in a damp place, and he didn't listen to me, and he died. That was more forceful. That was the second opinion was more forceful than the first in that mashal. Here too, now Hashem is saying to Aaron, don't you die the way they died. They were the bad guys. They were stupid. They died because they didn't listen to me, but you should listen to me. It tends to suggest it's pejorative, it's critical of the two sons of Aaron. You might think that's the implication of that. Reading that Rashi might imply that it means that they did something bad. So that's suspicion number one that might be aroused by the way the psukim are written at the beginning of the parsha. Number two, maybe there's a problem with Aaron. And that's why he says, don't die the way that George died, or the way your two sons died. Because, I think we might. I think some of the problems really lies with you, like father, like son, after all. So they died for that, maybe you'll die as well. So maybe it's Aaron is the reason. Does that make sense? Okay, let's go on. So it says, Alkin, and therefore, let me start to answer some of the questions. Alkin, the law is Baruch Hasras Aaron, when it comes to the Israel, when it comes to warn Aaron, the same fate should not overtake him that overtook his two sons. It says, first of all, V'yidaber. So that's the positive. V'yidaber is to mean to speak harshly or strongly, maybe a better word. And he speaks to Moshe, but it doesn't, as we pointed out, say what he said. Yes, it does. The Alshich says it does say what it says. What did it say? V'yidaber Hashem el Moshe. Now, remember, our first suspicion might be there's something wrong with the two sons of Aaron. No, the first thing Hashem said to Aaron, to Moshe was, "V'yidaber Hashem el Moshe, Achare Moshe b'nei Aaron," after the two sons of Aaron, v'karvosim l'fnei Hashem le'Moshe. It was their closeness to me that caused their death. It doesn't say behikarvom when they brought something, but kirvom when they came closer. It says bekarvosom. Their state of being close to me caused their death. And we all know that there's a principle that the greater the tzaddik, the more strict Hashem is, the more demanding Hashem is of him. So because these, and that's in fact, that's what Moshe said to Aaron. I knew that it was going to be a death at this moment. I just knew this. I thought it was going to be Uriah. But in actual fact, it was your two sons, and that leads me to realize they were greater than you and I were. So that's what it says. It says what Hashem said to Moshe. What Hashem said to Moshe was, and he says it strongly, don't let it into your mind, Moshe, not get any or people any suspicions, even microscopic suspicions about the motives of the two sons of Aaron. V'karvosim. It was their closeness to me, Lifnei Hashem. And it doesn't say Lifnei HaMizbeach or Lifnei HaParashas or Orim, into the Holy of Holies. It says in front of me. It was their state of being close to me that caused them to die. And then it says, V'yom Hashem el Moshe. Now it flips the other way about. We'll toss the coin the other side. And that is all. Maybe the problem was with Aaron. Maybe that's why he has to give this strong warning that Rashi alluded to. The second doctor, don't die, let they die. Maybe the question was him. V'yom Hashem el Moshe, daber el Aaron achicha. No, then he says V'yom Hashem el Moshe, and V'yom Hashem, it switches to soft and gentle speech. Daber el Aaron achicha. Speak to Aaron, your brother. Aaron's your brother. I consider him the way I consider you. You're brothers. You're joined at the hip. Just like there's no complaint against you, there was no complaint against him either. So therefore, if we put that together with our Sasemis and the Rabbi Yerucham, the fundamental nature, and maybe why one of the reasons we're reading Achare was after we're going out from Mitzrayim, because the journey from Mitzrayim is in order to become avodim. Don't think that the death of Aaron's two sons is because they failed to be avodim. Quite the opposite. They were the ultimate avodim. So what did they do wrong? Well, as the Sasemis says beautifully, the doing of a mitzvah is a source of chaim. It brings life. That's only if a mitzvah has been commanded. But if you do something, if you want to do something, go that extra mile, do that extra bit for Hashem, which has not been demanded, then you're not getting chiyus. You're not getting a life. The mitzvah is not giving you life. It's not because it's not connected to Hashem. Hashem didn't ask you to do it. He didn't want you to connect in that way. If he wanted you to connect, he would have given you a mitzvah to do it in that way. But they brought an offering that wasn't demanded and asked of them. That consequently was an action which didn't build a connection to God. And that, according to Sasemis, is why they passed away. I think there's a huge lesson here as well. I can't remember who says this. As the Kli Yoker, and I think it's in Parshas V'Chalaska. The Kli Yoker says, you've got to be extraordinarily, it's Parshas Nossos, as the Seder Parshas Nossos. The Torah has got certain mitzvahs that build a relationship. There is, of course, the idea of going beyond the letter of the law. However, it says in Kli Yoker, you've got to be extremely careful about going beyond the letter of the law. You see, when you do a mitzvah which God demands of you, you have certain protection. The protection of the Torah, the protection of Hashem who asked you to do it, and the protection of the mitzvah itself. But what if you take on a stringency, a chumrah, which Hashem did not ask you to take on? Then he's not there to protect you, because I didn't ask you to take it on. The mitzvah is not mitzvah, something you want to do, you're volunteering to do. And he says that the Yitzhara, Satan makes a particular beeline, targets the people who have gone beyond what the Torah demands. And now with this insight in Sasemis, you can see an extra aspect of that. Because the mitzvah gives life, because it connects you to the source of life. which is Hashem. At their level, the level of Aaron's two sons, there was that tiny mistake. They wanted to do too much and lost the protection. Instead of the mitzvah generating connection to God, the source of life, there was no connection. And consequently, no life flowed from that. In fact, death did. We've got to be extremely careful to keep within the parameters, the metric of the Torah. You've got to be an Eved Hashem. That's what it's all about. The mitzvahs help you to exercise the muscle, the Eved muscle of your connection to Hashem. But if it's not a mitzvah, it might, instead of connecting you, disconnect you. And that's something we always want to avoid. We enjoyed that, and I look forward to seeing you next week when again we'll learn the Alshich on the Parsha. Good job.